Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're going to continue our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. We are looking at EX Crystal Guardians, which there's only two now. There's only two Generation 3 sets after this one, and then we're moving on to the Diamond and Pearl era, which I suppose gives me 3 weeks to finish my playthrough of Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. As always, do make sure you spam the like button on these videos. They're not as popular as I would like, but I get a lot of good feedback and I kind of love doing them, so let's spam the like button. Leave some comments. Tell me your memories. You know how YouTube works by now. Now, this was a set that came out in Japan on March the 10th, 2006, following in the UK, US, Europe, etc. an English release on the 30th of August, 2006. And this, again, there was a little bit of a story. We're still kind of in the Holon region-ish. Shout out to the lovely folks at Bulbapedia for making this nice and easy to look up. But essentially, this was set on an island far from Holon, where the Delta species and regular Pokemon live in harmony. So essentially, we're still talking Delta species, those alternate type Pokemon. And there are naturally growing crystals that grant powers if used correctly. So we're going to be talking about some phenomenal cards in this set. Things like Cessation Crystal and Crystal Beach, and a couple of others, that are very much themed around the theme of this set, which is, hey, there's these weird crystals growing, and if you use them nicely, they're kind of powerful. Now, one of the cool things about this set, now they only gave us one, but they did actually give us a Delta species Pokemon EX. We got Sceptile EX Delta, just the one, but that's okay. We at least got one, and we're going to be talking about Sceptile later on. It wasn't some out-and-out broken phenomenal card, but it was pretty gosh darned good. For what it's worth, in the next set, all of the EXs were Delta species, but we're not there yet, ladies and gentlemen. We're not there yet. Also worth noting, what was very, very cool is, well, we did have the promo Ivysaur for pre-releases, but we once again got ourselves a promo deck box, this time featuring Blastoise. So these were, you know, the few sets that actually gave us promo deck boxes, as well as your regular promo cards when you rocked up to pre-releases. They were very cool boxes, and better quality than the ones that would come in later sets that we'll get to later. Now, we did also see these really cool promos here, like they tended to do once a year, where Squirtle was the City Championship promo, Wartortle was the State Championship promo, and then Blastoise came along as the National Championships promo. I love that they did this, essentially, as you went up through larger tournaments. At the time, that was basically going up from smaller tournaments to larger tournaments, building up the evolution line as you went. I approved wholeheartedly. Though there was no box topper here, like we said, box toppers unfortunately had stopped at this stage, and it was actually the first set that didn't have one in a while, which is really quite sad. Now, in terms of EXs, there were a bunch in the set. We got Aggron EX, Blaziken EX, which in a way is kind of sad because we previously had a Blaziken EX that was phenomenal. Wasn't this one. Delcatty EX, I saw a little bit of play here and there. Exploud EX, Groudon EX, Jirachi EX, which was a very good card, we'll get there later. Kyogre EX, the aforementioned Sceptile EX Delta, the first and at the time only of the Delta EXs, so there would be more later. Shiftry EX, which was a very good card that saw a fair amount of play. And Swampert EX, which had weird art like he's coming to get you. And then in terms of Pokemon stars, we just had the two. We had Alakazam Star and Celebi Star. They were very cool. People like star cards. They end up being quite expensive. Speaking of which, in terms of the most expensive cards, you're really talking about the Alakazam and Celebi Star here. It's very difficult to try and judge prices of these because they really don't sell all that often, but about $300 is a fair estimate. Outside of the stars, you're looking at Charizard Delta. It's a Charizard. It's kind of a cool lightning type Charizard, which is kind of fun. And metal type, dual type, as the holos tended to be. But honestly, Holo Delta Pokemon, not all of them mind. But the thing is, it's a Charizard, so of course it's going to be expensive. Actually commands a higher price than any of the EXs in the set. It is about $100 card because it's a Charizard, and the fact that it's a lightning metal type Charizard really does increase the collectability a fair bit. Now, in terms of theme decks, what was kind of cool here is that we actually had 3 theme decks. Now, nowadays, you see this fairly often. I mean, in Sword and Shield, we had 3 theme decks, 1 for each of the first partner Pokemon, and it is fairly standard when introducing a new block to have 3 theme decks, 1 for each of the first partner Pokemon. But that was not a thing that actually happened back then. So we had the green Cyclone theme deck with Venusaur on the front. This was a grass type theme deck, and you got yourself a holo Venusaur, which was exclusive to the deck. It was only a non-holo in the set. And you got yourself a rare Loudred, or a couple of rare Loudred, I suppose. We saw ourselves Storm Surge, which was the Blastoise theme deck. This was a Water Lightning theme deck, and you got yourself a holo Blastoise, again Blastoise being a non-holo in the set proper, and you got yourself a rare Fearow Delta, and a rare Pelipper Delta. And then we got Earth Shower. Now, Earth Shower, you might think it would be a Charizard theme deck. Based on the others, it wasn't. It was a Swampert theme deck, which was actually exclusive to Walmart in the US. Now, outside of the US and Europe, etc., it was just commercially available. It wasn't really a big deal. But in the US, it could only be bought in Walmart. And this was a water fighting type deck with a holo Swampert, which was exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set. And a non-holo Dugtrio, which was exclusive to the deck. It was a holo in the main set proper, as well as a non-holo Medicham. How cool! Now, in terms of the best cards, this was a set that really brought us techs, far more than it brought us decks. I have done some digging on Jason Kaczynski's wonderful blog on PTCG Archive, trying to find some actual Crystal Guardians decks. There really aren't very many. But this was a set which really did bring in a huge amount of very, very good tech cards that would find their way into a whole bunch of decks. So, Fearow Delta. This did actually pop up in the Flyvies world-winning deck. And Fearow had the Pokepower Delta sign. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a Pokemon that has Delta in its card and put it into your hand. Though it was limited to 1 Fearow during your turn, no matter how many you had out. So clearly, in a Delta deck, Fearow became a really, really good option. Jirachi EX was a card that actually did come around in a lot of decks. It had the Pokebody Starlight. As long as your opponent has any Pokemon EX or Stage 2 Pokemon in play, it paid 1 less energy to use either Shield Beam or Super Psybolt. Okay. Now, Super Psybolt turned into 2 energy, 50 damage, we don't really care. But Shield Beam, as long as your opponent had an EX or Stage 2 in play, and a lot of decks would, Shield Beam for a single Psychic Energy did 30 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, your opponent cannot use any Poké Powers on his or her Pokemon. So, yes, it's a 90 HP Pokemon that gives up 2 prizes, and no, it doesn't do a huge amount of damage. But catch your opponent at the right time with this, and you could kind of shut down their deck, which was very, very awesome. Now, Baynet was a very good card, but really it just fit into the Baynet EX decks we talked about a couple of sets ago. It had the Pokebody Safeguard, which prevented all effective attacks, including damage, done to Baynet by your opponent's Pokemon EX. Now, this obviously fit very nicely because if you're playing Baynet anyway, you might as well just rock one of these in. And at the end of the day, there were enough EXs around that this could be a relevant card. Also worth pointing out that the Shuppet in this set was really good as well. It had Ascension, which we have seen since. For 1 colourless energy, you searched your deck for a card that evolved from Shuppet and put it onto Shuppet, i.e. evolved it. So on turn 1, on your first turn, you could essentially use Shuppet to evolve into Baynet and have that Baynet ready at the end of your first turn. Now, Sableye was a card that did come around occasionally. It did find its way into the Intimidation World deck, although I did not see it popping up in many deck lists at all. And, I mean, it did have the attack disable, 10 damage, and it turned off one of the defending Pokemon's attacks. Useful against a Pokemon that only had one attack it wanted to use, but then again, it was 10 damage, so... Really here, it was a Poke Power Excavate. Once during your turn, you may look at the top card of your deck, and either put it on top of your deck or discard it. And really, this was just a very mild way to increase consistency in your deck. What it did was basically either say, I am drawing into the card I want to next turn, yay, or I'm not drawing into the card I want to, so I'm going to discard it to increase the chances that I will draw into the card I want to. A far more widely played tech that did pop up in an awful lot of decks was Tauros. Now, the one colourless energy search for 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. We've seen Call for Family see a lot of play over the years, and this was a nice bonus, but really here it was a Poke Power Crush chance. Once during your turn, when you put Tauros from your hand onto your bench, you may discard a stadium in play. And we're not quite there yet, we'll get there in a moment, but let's just say that things like Crystal Beach, for instance, pretty good card. There are some stadiums, we'll get there in a moment. Although, having said that, there were other stadiums we mentioned in previous sets. Things like Battle Frontier, for instance. This really was a Pokemon. If you look through old deck lists, you will find this popping up as a one-of in an awful lot of old decks. Shiftry EX was a very, very nice card that really did find its way into really just its own deck, honestly. It was kind of a deck in and of itself. But it had the wonderful Pokebody Dark Eyes. After your opponent's Pokemon uses a Poke Power, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. We've already seen how many Pokemon are using Poke Powers at the time. But the thing is, it doesn't say if it's active, and it doesn't say limited to 1. So if you've got, say, 4 Shiftry out, even if they're all on the bench, your opponent uses any Poke Power, they have to take 8 damage counters. And in a format where a Stage 2 2-prize Pokemon has 140 HP, that should tell you what you need to know about lower HPs at the time. This could be kinda brutal. Then it did have an attack for 2 energy that did 30 damage to any Pokemon, or 50 if they already had damage counters on. And obviously they use Poke Powers, they take damage. As soon as they got 50 or less, boom, target attack takes them down. Or 3 energy, 70 damage, if that's the kind of thing you're into. Now, Sceptile EX also found its way into a few decks. This was far more of a tech than it was its own deck, but it popped up here or there. Now, it had the Pokebody Extra Liquid that says each player's Pokemon EX cannot use any Poke Powers and pays 1 colourless energy more to use its attacks, though this was limited to 1 no matter how many Sceptile you had out. Yeah, this could be kind of annoying. If your opponent is using Poke Powers on their Pokemon EX, this could be big. And you'll notice in the format back then, there were lots of ways to either turn off or punish your opponent for using Poke Powers, but there were also lots of really good Poke Powers. And as far as I'm concerned, that's how we make a really good format. Lots of good Poke Powers, lots of counter cards, and then let everybody figure out the format for themselves. It's a good way to do it, ladies and gentlemen. It did have an attack for 2 energy that did 60 plus 10 more for each prize card your opponent has taken, but really we were playing it here for the Extra Liquid. And honestly, how weird an ability name or Pokebody name is Extra Liquid. Now, one that probably wasn't actually that good, but I've seen it pop up in a couple of lists and I do love it, was Grumpig. Now, Grumpig's got the Pokebody Thick Fat that reduces damage done to it by fire and water Pokemon by 30, but also for 3 energy you did 10 damage for each Pokemon in play other than Grumpig, yours and your opponent's, so potentially up to 110 damage on a single prize Pokemon. That's kinda cool. And the final Pokemon I'm going to shout out is another one which saw a bit of play here and there but really wasn't a powerhouse, Delcatty EX. Now, it had the Poke Power Constrain. Once during your turn, you can make each player discard cards until they have 6 in their hand. So this could be good if you needed to play from the discard pile, or even just good if your opponent had a large hand. And then for 1 colorless energy, you shuffled all the energy back into your deck from your discard pile, doing 10 damage for each energy you find there. So clearly high energy decks could use Delcatty, hurt your opponent, but you'd also be discarding a bunch of energy yourself, and then do a big attack using Delcatty. Now honestly, a lot of the best cards in this set really were the supporters, or trainers generally, only really one supporter, and Cessation Crystal was probably the biggest of them. Cessation Crystal took multiple decks to the World Championships. You see, Cessation Crystal was a Pokemon tool, and you attached it to a non-EX, and as long as it was on your active Pokemon, nobody can use Poké Powers or Poké Bodies. If you had a non-EX in the active with this attached, no Poké Bodies, no Poké Powers. Now, it was for both you and your opponent, but you would play decks like Empoleon or Empoleon, i.e. the 2 Empoleon that won the World Championships, or at least did very well and got Worlds decks printed, and then essentially you would not care because you would be in the lovely position of not needing Poké Powers and Poké Bodies. And this actually led to a whole bunch of decks having to actively counter it. We saw things like Cyclone Energy, Warp Point, POW Hand Extension, basically anything that could switch your opponent's active Pokemon that would be used just to try and get around Cessation Crystal. It was kind of big. Speaking of kind of big, Windstorm. Now, Windstorm is very similar to a card we've seen a bit more recently. And what it does is it lets you choose up to 2 in any combination of Pokemon tools and stadiums in play and discard them. So really, really big for taking out something like, oh, I don't know, maybe that's Cessation Crystal, but also some of these super annoying stadiums we've talked about as well. Windstorm saw a huge amount of play, and I'm not saying you either played Cessation Crystal or you played Windstorm, but certainly the interaction between them is pretty obvious. Now, Crystal Shard also saw a fair amount of play. As long as it was attached to a Pokemon, it was colorless, and then if it attacked, you discarded it at the end of your turn. So you could do this to get around resistance, or you could do this to get around particular abilities that would reduce damage or turn off your Pokepals or whatever if you were a particular type of Pokemon. It was a really weird little tech card, but one that was very, very cool. Made its way into a couple of world decks. Now, the supporter card in the set that was really good was Castaway. You searched your deck for a supporter, a Pokemon tool, and a basic energy. And this could lead to basically chaining. So you use Castaway to grab a Pokemon tool and an energy, and if there's no other supporter card you desperately need, you grab a Castaway, and then round and round we go. Didn't have to be used to chain, but that was an option that you had. We also saw Crystal Beach. Now, this was another card that was absolutely huge and saw a gigantic amount of play. Crystal Beach came along, and it basically said that each special energy that would provide 2 or more now just provides 1 colorless energy. I know, right? So we talked about Scramble Energy and how big that was at the time. Remember, Scramble Energy only actually started working and providing the extra effect if you went behind on prizes. So your opponent here would try and go ahead on prizes, but they would have Crystal Beach down, so you would be behind on prizes, but you still wouldn't actually be allowed to use it properly. That was kind of annoying. Also, those Hold-On Pokemon that could provide 2 energy? Yeah. No, they don't. And then Mysterious Shard saw a little bit of play here and there. Again, we're not talking the biggest, bestest card ever, but now it could only be attached to a non-Pokemon EX. If it was ever attached to an EX, you discarded it, so you couldn't attach it to a pre-evolution and then evolve into an EX and keep it. But what it did was prevented all effective attacks, including damage, done to this Pokemon by EXs for 1 turn. It got discarded at the end of the turn. And there were things like Windstorm that could get rid of it and then just attack. But it could give you a turn of immunity against Pokemon EXs. It found its way into a couple of decks here and there. Now, honestly, in terms of the top decks, we are reaching a little bit, I'll be honest with you. This was not a set that brought us lots of decks. It was generally a set that brought us lots of tech cards. Lots of cards to improve existing decks. So, we could argue Bayonet, and Bayonet did actually win the World Championships in Seniors, so that's worth pointing out. Was printed as a Worlds deck, was a very, very nice deck. Really, this deck was built around Bayonet EX, but it did play one of the Bayonet from Crystal Guardians, and the Shuppet Hero of Ascension was very, very important, so we can kind of count it. Bayonet just had the ability to let you move a damage counter from any Pokemon to another Pokemon, and it had the attack that did 30 damage plus 10 more for each supporter in your discard. Only up to 90 damage, but you would generally be hitting 90 damage very, very quickly, so it was a very, very cool deck that people liked. Honestly here, if we're looking at new decks, purely from this set, you're probably talking about Shiftry. Honestly, I think Shiftry is about the closest we get to a really good Crystal Guardians deck. And it really is a deck that is built around Shiftry. You're trying to get Shiftry up and rolling, preferably multiples of them. Hey Pidgeot, lets you search for any card, kinda good. And then you punish your opponent for using Poké Powers, while using your target attack to then pick them off once they're a little bit damaged. It was a fun little card, and it was a very cool deck. It would make use of Team Magma's Hideout. Whenever a player played a basic Pokemon without Team Magma in its name to the bench, they would put 1 damage counter on it, so that would help to speed up the KOing with Shiftry, and also put damage counters on Pokemon that didn't have Poké Powers, so that they could then be sniped better with Shiftry. And being a mono-type deck that really did attack with Shiftry, maybe Kingdra was a good idea. Now, certainly the list I'm using here comes from the lovely Jason Klaczynski's blog, and that does play one of the Kingdra from Team Rocket Returns, so that you can take away your weakness, which is always pretty big in a mono-type deck. And one other deck I do want to mention very quickly before we finish is Grumpig. Now, I got this one from PTCG Archive, another very cool website. And it really was more of a Grumpig from Emerald deck, but it's still kind of cool. Grumpig from Emerald for free energy did 40 damage and switched to the bench, and then not unlike the Politoed EX deck I've told you about, you would put fossils active, and they would be fossils that, well, they didn't give up a prize when they were KO'd. They were basically Pokemon, but they didn't give up prizes. And then, like Claw Fossil would put 1 damage counter on the attacking Pokemon. So not only did your opponent not get a prize when they took a KO, but they actually would take damage. And if you're playing that, you would play one of these Grumpig that's basically for circular steps, 10 damage for each Pokemon in play. It wasn't really a powerhouse deck, although Andrea Ciolin, and I know him personally, very lovely dude, he did get second at Italian Nationals using this deck, so it was a real deck that saw a little bit of success, but we are talking very, very much a bit of a rogue deck. Sorry. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is EX Crystal Guardians. Not a set that introduced a huge amount of powerhouse decks, but it got to the point where many decks around would end up using cards from this set, because as much as it might have been underwhelming in terms of introducing new archetypes, when it came to introducing new tech cards, this was one of the best. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I think. That's everything you need to know as far as I'm concerned, but maybe you've got memories, maybe you don't have memories, but you've now seen these cards for the first time and you've got some impressions. Either way, let me know in the comment section, would ya? Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing is always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.